Hello everyone, my name is Mary Margaret, and if you've been on my channel before, welcome back. If you are new, I'm so excited to see you here. I talk mainly about books on my channel, but I also like to integrate sort of discussions or videos about art as well as history sometimes, and I also really enjoy just kind of, talking about life. So whether that's more of a philosophical thing or just in general, kind of more of an overview of what's been going on with my life. So it has been an incredibly busy summer, but I am happy to say I think I'm going to have a little bit more time to read for fun over the fall semester, so I am hoping that that will actually be the case and I will have more content for you than I did over the summer. So today I wanted to actually give you a book review because in my previous videos I have done kind of more descriptions of what I'm currently reading, as well as some videos about what I would like to read and a few book recommendations as well. So that being said, I wanted to have an actual conversation about one book in a video and just talk about why I liked it, why I didn't like it, etc., and kind of give you an overview. Now I will say, spoiler alert, this video is about a book that I loved, and so you probably won't hear too many critiques from me. I'm hoping to convince you to actually read it, but hopefully you will enjoy hearing about some positive sort of feedback about a book. So without more sort of talking about that in general, I'm just going to sort of jump into conversation about this book. So today's book that I wanted to talk about is a book written by Marilyn Monroe, which you know because it is in the title of this video. And so the reason I wanted to talk about this book is, well, there are a lot of different reasons. So first, let me just tell you what it's called, and I'm looking down, it's actually a digital book. I read it on Scribd. I talk about Scribd all the time, but just this year I have found it to be incredibly helpful because I usually like to go get books at the library that I don't own, and so it's really nice to have so that I can actually read different books than the ones that I own without having to purchase them. So the book is called Fragments, Poems, Intimate Notes, and Letters. And it's going to be listed basically with the author's name as Marilyn Monroe because these are all writings of Marilyn Monroe. So let me just talk a little bit about what the book actually is. I'm going to put my iPad down that I was reading it on because I don't need it anymore. I didn't want to misquote the title of the book though. So one of the reasons I really loved this book is that it really humanized an actress that a lot of people tend to sort of turn into more of a sort of stereotype of a particular type of actress or just a sort of aesthetic ideal, as opposed to a human being who had emotions, who had these sort of really deep reactions to life in general. And so I found this book to be incredibly moving. What I was really surprised by is how much there was to this book. Even though it was quite brief, and I thought way too brief, I wanted more, but of course we all know Marilyn Monroe's life was cut tragically short, and so I do think that had she lived to an older age, she would have written quite a bit more and of even greater depth than what we get in this particular book. But I think it really is one of those things where you actually get to see and know a person on a deeper level through these fragments, as the book is called. So the book itself is actually going to be compiled of a bunch of different poems that Marilyn Monroe composed herself. Also within the book you are going to find a lot of different sort of thoughts. It's almost like little diary entries, and then you are also going to find lists of things that she wanted to learn more about or just of songs that she liked. And I think that's one of the best parts about this, is that it's sort of a scattered look, a very, again, fragmented look at Marilyn Monroe. A lot of people think that Marilyn Monroe didn't really think too much, or that she wasn't that intelligent. There was so much more to her than a lot of people had recognized, and still to this day don't even recognize. And I think if you are interested in old Hollywood or just learning more about different human beings in general, that you will enjoy this book. I really, really enjoy the poetry that Marilyn Monroe wrote within this book, and I think it was mainly because what's so interesting is we actually get to see her writing process because they kept within this publication all of the words that she crossed out. And so you can see sort of her writing process on the piece of paper and sort of see which different paths she almost went on with the way she was writing and then how she changed it. And so that was really interesting to read on, my end. I really enjoyed that. And I've been reading a lot of different poetry this year, and so I really enjoyed getting to sort of read poetry from one of my favorite actresses. One of the things that was kind of tricky about this book, though, is that it feels incredibly invasive to actually read. And the reason I say that is because what we have in this particular book are a lot of different really personal writings of this actress. We don't really see past Marilyn Monroe as an actress back to the Norma Jean that everybody sort of forgets about, the original, person that was there before and during, the actress years, the real person that she was born as, and this facade that she had as an actress, as Marilyn Monroe, is what most people tend to remember her for. And so it's difficult to read the book in the sense that it feels incredibly invasive to be reading such personal thoughts. But I think that's really what lends to the power of the book, and that's why I enjoyed reading it so much. But I will give you a bit of a warning. It's not the happiest book to read. And that's because Marilyn Monroe was a very troubled individual in a lot of different ways, which I'm going to go into detail a little bit about what she discusses within this book that I found to be particularly moving or interesting, or both. And I think that's something to keep in mind, but it really is what adds another level of enjoyment to the read, in the sense that I was reading it and you can identify with different elements within the book because it's such a common shared human experience to think a lot of the different thoughts that she wrote down in her poetry, in her diary entries, in her letters that she sent to certain individuals, whatever the case may be. So before I talk about what I thought of different parts of this book in more detail, I wanted to read just one section of poetry from her book. And it's kind of, as I said, I keep saying the word fragmented, and that's because if you read this book, it's kind of almost like modernistic in how you read it, just because of the way that it is so jarring to go from word to word in a lot of cases. There are words missing, there are words scratched out. So if this sounds a little bit weird, it's because I sort of pushed together a longer section into a smaller one of my favorite parts, and then some words are missing. It's a little bit bare in ways, but that's part of the reason I love it so much. So I'm just going to read this really quickly. I'm not that great at reading poetry, but I had to share. So it says, "One's own truth is just that, really, one's own truth. So one is for most part alone. Perhaps it could make our understanding seek another's loneliness out." So I will post that quote beneath the video. I think that's a really good representative of how the writing sort of comes across in the book. But I really appreciated how it was written because it sort of made sense to me as somebody who has a kind of more scattered thinking process. I enjoyed reading this. I have these notes here in my little notepad, so if I'm looking down, it's because I'm trying to structure this video in such a way that it's somewhat cohesive and not as scattered as I tend to be. One of the most prevalent themes within this book are these sort of ideas or thoughts being written down about loneliness. And I get the sense that Monroe was really feeling a lot of loneliness throughout her life, and this particular publication has basically very personal writings from her very young years, I think her late teens, all the way up until when she died. And so we get to see a span of a decent amount of years, and within that span there are quite a few writings about feeling lonely or feeling isolated, which is very heartbreaking but also, again, as I said, very relatable. And she talks about feelings of isolation and loneliness, not only when she was actually by herself, but also when she was in these crowds of people, when she was filming movies, when she was going on tours, or whatever the case may be. That is something that you will notice if you read this book. A lot of the other things that Monroe talks about are these sort of ideas about humanity, what it means to be a human being, the human experience, what her life was actually like. And I think that's something that, again, just kind of reiterating this idea, a lot of people don't really give her credit for being philosophical at all, but she was very philosophical in the way that she thought, especially in her writing. That's what I'm kind of coming across with my reading of her work. And there's also a lot of a sort of tendency to disregard any of her sort of humanity as a person, like I said, who was in Hollywood. And they really didn't think about her as having any sort of feelings or emotions. And I think a lot of the things that she wrote in this book really had to do with the idea of trying to figure out how to convey to the world that she was not an automaton, that she did have feelings and she was a human being, and that the way that people spoke about her really did affect her, even though she tried not to let it affect her. And so that's something that was really heart-wrenching to read. Along those same lines, there are quite a few sort of elements within this where she talks about being an actress, what that was like for her. And it was a really grueling process for her, as most people who worked or have worked in acting know that it is a very time-consuming and very draining thing to be an actor, actress, whatever. And so it's something that I think a lot of people don't consider, is that it was actually very difficult for Monroe to actually play the roles that she played. She was not naturally the way that she was on screen. It took a lot of effort and it took a lot of work on her part to get to those sorts of positions and into those roles. So I thought that was really interesting to read about, especially as someone who is a fan of old Hollywood. That was something that I found to be really eye-opening. Another one of the sort of common threads within this book was really going to be this whole idea of self-doubt. And Monroe really talked a lot about how she wanted to sort of have these feelings about herself and have this sort of confidence that she so envied with other people, but it really did sort of just kind of spiral into these sort of depressed states, I would say, where she felt that she could not match others' expectations, but especially her own expectations, because she had very high expectations of what she wanted to be and what she wanted to achieve. And so that was something that was really quite interesting to read about, and I think that a lot of people also forget, and I mean, when I say a lot of people, I've said that a lot in this video, I mean myself included. I forget these sorts of things all the time. And so within this sort of idea of being an actress and having to look a certain way and act a certain way, there are all of these sort of expectations that are placed for you, and that has to be really exhausting to sort of live up to those expectations. But there also has to be a certain amount of feelings of being an imposter, and I think that she suffered a lot with that. And you can tell that a lot with the way that she speaks about herself in her writing. And it also translates into her friendships, and particularly in her romantic relationships, which those were very troubled as well, oftentimes. Within that, you do get a lot of writing within this book about Monroe's sort of ideas about love, what that means, how she feels about those people that she loves. Oftentimes she would write about the person she was married to at the time, and those are really interesting to read. I think it really does give a clear insight into who she was as a person, that she was definitely not perfect, as we are all imperfect human beings, and she did have a tendency to get quite jealous, which is so interesting to think about, because Marilyn Monroe was such a beautiful person inside and out, And so it's kind of astonishing to think that someone who seems so perfect could be jealous of somebody else. So I think that's kind of a pretty hefty reminder to us all to, know that nobody is above these human experiences, right? If I look like I moved, it's because I went to get my tea because I was getting sort of choked up talking, and so I went and got my tea that I forgot that I had. So I made myself a cup of passion tea, which is very appropriate when talking about Marilyn Monroe, I think. Definitely oversteeped this though. It's a very, very strong cup of passion tea. Anyway, I'll just hold this for a second. One of the other things you will find within this book that I thought was really fascinating to look at were all of these different lists that Marilyn Monroe created of works of art she wanted to study, books that she wanted to read, and different sort of things that she wanted to learn about. And it was so interesting to me to learn how much she wanted to learn. And she would take classes, she would take notes, she would go to all of these different events to learn more about different things. She wanted so much to be educated and to be a sort of intellectual within the world. And I think that's something that I personally appreciated a lot as someone who is a teacher and who loves to learn all the time. I'm always wanting to learn things. And so I found that to be a really cool thing to see. And I loved her lists of art works that she was sort of studying, and there are so many different works that I thought it was just too cool to see in the book. And one thing I did forget to mention is that within this book there are also a lot of different pictures that I have never seen before. And one of the most interesting points within the book that is made is that Marilyn Monroe took so much trouble to make sure she was photographed with books. A lot. And if you look it up, you can find a decent number of pictures of Marilyn Monroe with books or reading. And whether that's in a bookstore or in her home or whatever the case may be, she wanted to be remembered as a reader. So with that being said, I don't want to talk too much more about this book just because I want you to go and read it and see what you think of it yourself. But I think that's one of the last things that I would like to impress upon you is the fact that Marilyn Monroe wanted to be remembered as a reader and sort of as this intellectual person who wanted to be educated and who wanted to learn. With that in mind, I think reading her writing and sort of trying to understand her better as a person, I think that's one thing I would keep in your mind is that she wanted to be remembered for these things. So I want to sort of hopefully encourage you to read this book. It's not very long, it doesn't take very long, but it really has a lasting impact. And B, I just really want for you to at least be aware of who Marilyn Monroe wanted to be as you read about her a little bit more. That's one of the reasons I really wanted to review this book, is to let people know it exists. And I really want to read a biography of her now. And I will say I have waited for a while to do so because, as I said before, this is a very heavy book to read, and so I knew a biography of her would break my heart, and so I was like, I will wait. But I hope that, if you are interested in this book, please comment below. I will tell you any information you would like to know about it. If you have any questions though, please let me know, and hopefully you enjoyed this review style. I think to encapsulate my overall experience with it, I found it to be incredibly philosophical, which was really surprising to me. Apologies again, I need to find a different chair to sit on to film because it creaks. I sound like I'm in the Haunted Mansion. But I just wanted to encourage you to read the book because I think it was really just so cool to see in the mind of Marilyn Monroe and to understand her better as a human being and understand her experience. And within this experience this year where we've all been inside most of the time and we don't get to see our family and friends like we want to, it's really nice to read a book where you are reading about these experiences that we are pretty much all dealing with this year, of isolation, of loneliness, of wanting to connect with people, all of those different things. It's just something that was perfect timing for me to read at that point, and I would highly recommend it to other people. I don't give star ratings lightly, and when I say that, I mean most of the time books I read range from 3 to 4 stars in ratings, unless I hate them, in which case it's going to be 2 or below. But this book I gave 5 out of 5 stars because I just loved it. I thought it was a fantastic book. Maybe it isn't perfect. Maybe it is fragmented, as I've said again and again and again, because it's just the best way to describe it. But I think that's really what gives it such a wonderful, strong finish. And I say that because I think it really does give a beautiful view of who Marilyn Monroe was as a person, and it gives us a very clear glimpse, clearer than any biography could have given, of who she was. And I wanted to add also that there are some biographical notes throughout this book that help give you information about who she's writing to, who she's writing about, and the very last part of the book actually has information about the books that she had in her library, which I loved. So I was like, I need to add all of these to my reading list. So anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this review. I hope this was helpful or interesting, even if you don't read the book, and I would love to hear your thoughts below, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!